Skyrim has 9 holds, 9 thrones, and somehow not a single Jarl who gets to sit comfortably in theirs. From puppet rulers controlled by crime families, to mystics who govern through visions nobody believes, to a man who shouted a king to death and called it politics. Today I'm breaking down every single Jarl in Skyrim and what makes each of them tick, starting with the one you meet first, and probably remember best, Jarl Balgruuf the Greater. Open your map in Skyrim and look at where Whiterun sits, dead center. Every road, every trade route, every military supply line flows through this hold, which means whoever controls Whiterun controls the spine of the entire province, and that person is Balgruuf the Greater. Here's the thing, Dragon's Reach wasn't just built to look impressive, it was literally constructed to trap a dragon. Each an ancient piece of Nordic infrastructure that becomes directly relevant when the Dragonborn needs to capture Odahviing during the main quest. This isn't just a city, it's a weapon that's been sitting dormant for centuries. But what makes Balgruuf genuinely fascinating is his politics. He's a former Imperial soldier who refuses to pick a side in the Civil War. Both factions are desperate for his support because losing Whiterun means losing Skyrim's center of gravity, and he knows it. He plays that leverage for as long as he possibly can, while every other Jarl has already drawn their line. He's also the first Jarl to formally recognize the Dragonborn and later participates in peace negotiations during Season Unending. No other Jarl is embedded in both the main quest and the Civil War questline simultaneously, but even inside Dragon's Reach, things aren't stable. His son Nelkir is being supernaturally influenced by a Daedric artifact hidden beneath the palace, whispering secrets and turning the boy against his own family. The real debate is whether his neutrality was brilliant strategy or political cowardice, because no matter how carefully he plays it, his position eventually collapses. He's forced to choose a side, and that choice undercuts everything he spent the war trying to protect. The Jarl who tried hardest to stay above the conflict got dragged in anyway, which makes him the perfect contrast to the next Jarl on this list, a man who didn't just pick a side, he started the entire war. Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak. Ulfric Stormcloak isn't just the Jarl of Windhelm. He's the man actively trying to rip Skyrim away from the Empire, and depending on who you ask, he's either the province's greatest hero or its most dangerous opportunist. Before the rebellion even started, Ulfric had already made a name for himself. Back in 4 EE 174, the Forsworn seized Markarth during a bloody uprising, and while the Empire sat on its hands, Ulfric led a militia straight through the gates and took the city back by force. That's where he earned the nickname the Bear of Markarth, and that's where people started paying attention. But here's where it gets complicated. His argument against the Empire isn't crazy. The Empire signed the White Gold Concordat, banned Talos worship, and essentially handed Skyrim's religious identity to the Thalmor on a silver platter. Ulfric's position is simple. An empire that sells out its own people doesn't deserve their loyalty anymore, and honestly, that's a hard point to argue against. Then he killed High King Torrid. He invoked the ancient Nordic right to challenge a High King to single combat, which is technically legal. But he used the Thuum to do it, the voice, a power almost nobody else in Skyrim possesses. To his supporters, that's a warrior using every tool at his disposal. To his critics, it's a man exploiting a legal technicality, with a weapon his opponent had zero chance of countering. It's the most controversial moment in Skyrim's political landscape, and the game never tells you who's right. Here's what makes Ulfric genuinely fascinating though. Studies analyzing player choices found that libertarian players were 2.29 times more likely to support the Stormcloaks than liberal players. His appeal maps almost perfectly onto anti-government, culturally nationalist messaging. The game accidentally created a political litmus test. But the strongest case against Ulfric isn't moral, it's strategic. His rebellion destabilizes Skyrim at exactly the moment the Aldmeri Dominion is most dangerous. Every soldier fighting in the Civil War is a soldier not preparing for the real threat. His independence movement could hand the Thalmor a weakened, divided province on a plate, which is arguably exactly what they want. And that tension, liberator or warlord, freedom fighter or useful idiot for the Thalmor is something the game never resolves. But speaking of people caught in Ulfric's wake, his most direct political victim might be the woman who inherited the mess he created, Jarl Elisif the Fair. Elisif holds the most prestigious title of any Jarl in Skyrim, and she might be the least powerful person in her own throne room. That's not an insult, it's a tragedy. She's the Jarl of Hafingar, ruler of Solitude, the imperial capital of the entire province. On paper, that makes her one of the most important political figures in the country, but she didn't earn that seat through ambition or political maneuvering. She got it because her husband, High King Torrid, was killed by Ulfric Stormcloak. One day, she was a young wife who genuinely loved her husband, who wanted nothing more than to attend social events together and enjoy their life. The next, she was a widow, thrust into governing a province at war. And here's where it gets complicated. Elisif's actual governance leans heavily on her steward, Falk Firebeard, who handles the real administrative work behind the scenes. She consults her thanes, Bryling, and Erikr for guidance on decisions and typically follows whatever they recommend. That's not necessarily incompetence. She's young, she's grieving, and she inherited a political nightmare she never asked asked for, but the result is the same. The people around her hold more practical power than she does. Ulfric himself calls her the pawn of the Empire during peace negotiations, and the uncomfortable truth is that he's not entirely wrong. Her policy positions align almost perfectly with General Tullius and Imperial military objectives. She calls the Stormcloak Rebellion a blight upon the face of Skyrim with zero ambiguity, no hedging, no nuance, total Imperial commitment. Whether that's admirable loyalty to the institution that protects Skyrim or political naivety from someone who's never had to question the Empire's motives depends entirely on your perspective. The real tension with Elisif is the gap between what she represents and what she controls. She's the claimant to High Queen. She governs the Imperial capital. And yet the men around her, Falk, Tullius, even Erikr, shape her hold's direction more than she does. She's sympathetic, she's genuine, and she's completely outmatched by the political machine she's been dropped into. But if Elisif's leadership feels uncertain because of grief and inexperience, wait until you meet a Jarl whose entire governing philosophy is based on psychic visions. Jarl Idgrod Ravencrone. Idgrod Ravencrone is quietly one of the strangest leaders in all of Skyrim, and that strangeness is exactly what makes her worth talking about. She's the Jarl of Hjalmarch, ruling from Morthal, a foggy little swamp town that most players sprint through without a second thought. But the woman sitting on that throne deserves a second thought, because she claims to see the future. Idgrod is an elderly Nord who says she receives prophetic visions and cryptic dreams. Messages from beyond that guide her decisions as Jarl. Her townspeople, for the most part, think she's just losing her mind, and honestly, you can't blame them. When your leader speaks in riddles and stares into the distance mid-conversation, senility is a reasonable guess. But here's where it gets interesting. She technically sides with the Empire during the Civil War, yet she doesn't feel like an Imperial Jarl at all. Now, there's no ideological fire behind her alignment. She's not passionate about the Empire. She's just not passionate about the Stormcloaks either. That philosophical distance makes her one of the most genuinely neutral-feeling rulers in the game, despite technically picking a side. Her most notable policy is one that flies under the radar for a lot of players. Idgrod tolerates magical practitioners in Hjalmarch, allowing them to operate out of private residences and sell their services openly. In a province where Nords distrust magic the way cats distrust water, that's a genuinely progressive stance. It's a small detail, but it says everything about who she is. She's a contemplative ruler in a world that rewards aggression. Now, the question the community keeps circling back to is whether her visions are real or delusion. The Waking Nightmare quest actually lends some weight to the supernatural side of that debate. That quest involves the Daedric Lord Vermina inflicting nightmares on an entire city's population, proving that metaphysical threats are very real in Skyrim. If Daedric Lords can attack people through their dreams, then maybe an old woman claiming to receive prophetic visions isn't so crazy after all. And if the Stormcloaks take Hjalmarch, Idgrid gets replaced by Sorley the Builder, a craftsperson, someone focused on construction and development. The contrast is about as sharp as it gets in Skyrim's political system. Mystic versus pragmatist, dreams versus blueprints. It's one of the cleanest personality swaps in the entire game. But if you think Hjalmarch's political situation is complicated, and wait until you see the mess happening in Markarth. Jarl Igmund. Igmund rules from Markarth, a city literally carved into the side of a mount. Stone walls, stone floors, stone everything. It's one of the most visually striking locations in all of Skyrim, and it also happens to be one of the most defensible. Dragons have a hard time burning down a city made of rock, but Igmund's real problems aren't coming from the sky. They're coming from every direction on the ground. He's an Imperial loyalist, which isn't unusual, but his specific brand of Imperial loyalty is the kind that makes everyone uncomfortable. Igmund openly advocates for maintaining peace with the Thalmor, not because he likes them, but because he understands that provoking the Aldmeri Dominion would be catastrophic for the Reach. It's the pragmatic call. It's also the call that earns you zero friends among traditionalist Nords who'd rather die fighting than bow to elven diplomats. But here's where it gets interesting. Igmund and Ulfric Stormcloak used to be on the same side. Back in 4E174, the Forsworn, the native Reachmen, seized Markarth during a full-scale uprising. The Empire was too busy dealing with the Great War to help, so Igmund turned to Ulfric and his militia to retake the city, and it worked. Ulfric's forces crushed the Forsworn and restored Nordic control over Markarth. For a brief moment, these two were allies. Then the Thalmor came knocking. They threatened invasion over Ulfric's activities, and Igmund had a choice: stand by his new ally or protect his hold. He cut Ulfric loose, completely. That single decision is the fracture point that put them on opposite sides of a civil war. Igmund chose stability over loyalty, and while that was arguably the smart move, nobody writes songs about the guy who picked the safe option. And then there's the Silverblood problem. Cidhnamoin, Markarth's prison, is operated by the Silverblood family, who use inmates as forced labor to extract silver. Official governance and private wealth are so tangled together in Markarth that it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. Igmund doesn't appear to challenge this arrangement at all, but the real concern is what happens if the Stormcloaks take the Reach, because his replacement is Thongvor Silverblood. The family that was already running the prison system and profiting off forced labor would now now formally control the entire hold. That's not a change in leadership. That's a consolidation of power. But if you think Markarth's power dynamics are messy, wait until you meet a Jarl who doesn't even realize she's already lost control of her own city. Jarl Layla Lawgiver. Layla Lawgiver is not a bad ruler. She's not corrupt, she's not lazy, and she's not delusional about the state of Skyrim. She genuinely believes in Nordic independence, she supports Ulfric's cause with real conviction, and she governs Riften from Mistvale Keep with every intention of doing right by her people. But here's the thing, none of that matters, because Layla doesn't actually run Riften. Maven Blackbriar does. Maven openly claims she has both the Jarl and the Riften Guard in her pocket. The Thieves Guild operates freely throughout the city, and Layla either doesn't know the full extent of it or refuses to acknowledge what she can't control. She believes she's managing the criminal element. In reality, she's a figurehead sitting on a throne that belongs to someone else. Every decision she makes, every law she passes, exists within boundaries that Maven has already drawn for her, and the tragedy doesn't stop at her court. It's inside her own family. Her two sons, Harold and Serland, have taken opposite sides of the Civil War. Harold backs the Stormcloaks alongside his mother. Serland supports the Empire. The war that's tearing Skyrim apart has literally fractured Layla's household, and she has to hold court every day with that division sitting right next to her. But here's where it gets truly bleak. If the Imperial Legion takes Riften, Layla is replaced. And her replacement isn't some Imperial-appointed bureaucrat. It's Maven Blackbriar herself, stepping out from behind the curtain to formally claim the seat she already controlled. Riften's governance doesn't actually change. It just stops pretending. And if the Stormcloaks win, Layla keeps her title, but nothing improves. Maven's grip doesn't loosen. Her faction winning the war doesn't free her from the shadow government running her city. After an Imperial victory, Layla ends up displaced to the Palace of the Kings in Windhelm, where she openly laments failing the people of Riften. It's a heartbreaking conclusion, but an honest one. She tried to lead a city that was never really hers to lead. She's not the worst Jarl in Skyrim. She might be the most tragic. And speaking of Jarls who absolutely do not deserve their seats, wait until you meet the laziest leader in the entire province. Jarl Sidgeir. You want to become Thane of Falkreath? Cool. Sidgeir's got one condition before he'll even consider it. Bring him a bottle of Blackbriar mead. Not a dragon slain, not a bandit camp cleared, not proof of loyalty to the hold. Mead. That's the price of entry for the guy running an entire region of Skyrim, and honestly, it tells you everything you need to know about him. Sidgeir is the youngest Jarl in the province and comfortably the least interested in actually governing. His steward Nenya handles the real administrative work while Sidgeir pursues whatever leisure activities a young Nord with inherited power and zero accountability decides to fill his days with. But here's where it gets interesting. How he ended up in that chair is genuinely suspicious. His predecessor, Dengir of Stune, claims he was removed on the grounds of being too old and frail to lead. Dengir doesn't buy that explanation for a second, and neither should you. The Imperial Legion had every reason to want a compliant Jarl in Falkreath, someone who wouldn't push back on policy, wouldn't ask hard questions, and wouldn't cause problems. Sidgeir fits that description perfectly. He's not a leader, he's a rubber stamp who happens to sit in a fancy chair. Therefore, the Empire gets a hold that stays loyal without requiring any actual political negotiation, and Sidgeir gets to live comfortably without doing any work. Everybody wins, except the people of Falkreath. But the replacement isn't exactly an upgrade. If the Stormcloak seize the hold, Dengir reclaims his seat, and immediately reveals why the too old and frail excuse had at least some merit. The man is consumed by paranoid conspiracy thinking. He can't trust his own advisors, suspects everyone around him of plotting against him, and governs through suspicion rather than strategy. So Falkreath's choice isn't between good leadership and bad leadership. It's between apathy and dysfunction. And that's what makes Sidgeir's character quietly devastating. He sits in the Jarl's longhouse demanding luxury mead while outside his walls. Falkreath's graveyard stretches larger than the town itself. That cemetery memorializes battles that killed Hogue Merkler and Kjorich the White. The hold carries centuries of sacrifice and bloodshed in its soil, real historical weight that shaped Skyrim's identity. And the man responsible for honoring that legacy can't be bothered to govern without a drink in his hand first. But if you think a lazy Jarl is bad, wait until you meet one who's aggressively terrible at the job. Jarl Skald the Elder, after Sidgeir, a Jarl who couldn't care less about his own hold. We get the exact opposite. Skald the Elder cares so much it might actually be a problem. His full name is Skald Felgeif, and he rules the Pale from his seat in Dawnstar, one of Skyrim's harshest northern settlements. But Skald isn't just a Stormcloak supporter, he's a zealot. Where other Jarls back Ulfric for political reasons or regional pride, Skald has built an entire theology around the rebellion. He genuinely believes the dragons have returned because Talos is punishing Skyrim for abandoning his worship after the White Gold Concordat. That's not a natural disaster, not an ancient prophecy unfold, divine retribution for religious betrayal. And here's where it gets interesting, because that belief isn't coming from nowhere. The Pale is one of Skyrim's 4 old holds, ancient territory with deep historical roots stretching back to the earliest days of Nordic settlement. Skald isn't some newcomer inventing traditions to justify a war. He's ruling land that has practiced these traditions for generations. His conviction has a genuine cultural foundation, which makes it harder to dismiss than you'd expect. But conviction alone doesn't keep a hold running. Dawnstar sits on Skyrim's frozen northern coast, battered by mountain winds and surrounded by pine forests that look like they're trying to survive winter as badly as the people are. Governing a place like that requires iron will, and Skald has that in abundance. His absolute certainty is arguably the glue holding the Pale together. When your people are freezing and the war is draining resources, a leader who never wavers gives them something to hold on to. But here's the part nobody talks about. While Skald is focused entirely on the Stormcloak cause and divine punishment, his own city is under supernatural attack. The Waking Nightmare quest reveals that every single person in Dawnstar is being tormented by nightmares inflicted by the Daedric prince Vermina. An entire population losing sleep, losing their minds, and Skald's attention is locked on Ulfric's war. It's the perfect illustration of his character. True believers see the crusade. They don't always see the fire burning in their own house. Unlike Balgruuf, who bends with the wind, or Sidgeir, who doesn't bother standing up at all, Skald never compromises. Not once. He's the archetype of the ruler whose convictions override every other consideration, for better and for worse. You can't negotiate with him, you can't reason with him, and honestly, in a province tearing itself apart, that kind of certainty is either exactly what people need, or the thing that gets them killed. Speaking of Jarls struggling against forces bigger than themselves, Courier has it even worse. Jarl, Courier is the Jarl of Winterhold, and that sentence carries about as much political weight as a title written in sand. Winterhold sits at the very top of Skyrim, the northernmost hold in the province, and it was once a thriving city of genuine importance. But the Great Collapse changed everything. Massive portions of the city broke apart and fell into the Sea of Ghosts in a catastrophic event that nobody has ever been able to fully explain. What's left is barely a village, a handful of buildings clinging to the edge of a cliff like they're waiting for permission to fall, and Courier rules over all of it. Here's the thing about being Jarl of Winterhold. You have the title, you have the longhouse, you have the authority, on paper, to govern your hold. But when your hold is a ruin, and your population could fit inside a single tavern, that authority means nothing. The other Jarls essentially ignore Courier's opinions on matters of provincial importance, because Winterhold has nothing to offer the conversation. No military strength, no economic output, no strategic leverage. He's a seat at the table that nobody looks at. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Sitting right next to Courier's crumbling city is one of the most powerful institutions on the entire continent, the College of Winterhold, and Courier hates it. He distrusts the mages, blames them for the collapse, and views the college with the kind of deep Nordic skepticism that borders on open hostility. The problem is that the college doesn't answer to him. It derives its authority from beyond his jurisdiction entirely, operating as an independent institution serving all of Tamriel. So Courier's disapproval is functionally irrelevant. He's a man shaking his fist at a building he cannot enter, cannot regulate, and cannot remove. The community debate around Winterhold centers on a question that the game never definitively answers. Did the Great Collapse cause Winterhold's political death, or did the college's presence, whether through magical accident or simple institutional neglect of the surrounding city, cause the collapse itself? Courier believes the latter. The college denies it, and nobody with real power cares enough to investigate. If Courier is displaced during the Civil War, he doesn't retreat to some ancestral stronghold or rally supporters for a return. He relocates to Brunwolf Free Winter's residence in Windhelm, political asylum with a sympathetic peer. That's the final portrait of Courier's authority, a Jarl whose exile amounts to crashing on someone else's couch. That because there's nothing left to fight for and no one who would fight alongside him. Speaking of Brunwolf, he's far more than just a sympathetic host for displaced Jarls. Jarl Brunwolf Free Winter. Before Brunwolf Free Winter ever sits on a throne, before he holds any title or commands any authority, he's walking the streets of Windhelm's east side in scaled horn armor, defending the Dunmer and Argonian populations from open hostility. That tells you everything you need to know about the man. Windhelm under Ulfric is a city defined by who it excludes. The Dark Elves are crammed into the Grey Quarter, living in squalor, while Nordic residents hurl slurs at them in broad daylight. The Argonians aren't even allowed inside the city walls. But Brunwolf doesn't wait for a political appointment to push back against this. He advocates for these communities when doing so earns him zero political capital and probably makes his life harder. And that's what separates genuine conviction from performance. If Brunwolf's progressivism were strategic positioning, he'd start caring about the Dunmer after he had something to gain from it. But he's doing this as a private citizen, a retired soldier with no office and no platform. The values come first, the power comes later, and only if the Imperial Legion wins. But here's where it gets complicated. Brunwolf's romantic partner is Elda Early Dawn, a woman who holds openly hostile views toward non-Nords. She's not subtle about it either. So you've got a man who genuinely fights for Windhelm's marginalized populations going home to someone who represents the exact prejudice he's pushing against. That contradiction doesn't make him a hypocrite. It makes him a real person navigating a messy world where your values and your personal life don't always line up cleanly. He's not the only progressive passive voice in Windhelm either. Susanna the Wicked shares his compassion for the city's non-Nord residents, hinting at a small but real coalition that could reshape Windhelm's identity under different leadership. The pieces are there for a fundamentally different city. Brunwulf just needs the authority to put them together. Where Ulfric's revolution is defined by exclusion, Brunwulf represents what Windhelm could become. Not a perfect city, but a less cruel one. And sometimes that's the most radical political statement you can make. But if Brunwulf represents the best of Skyrim's political class, the next Jarl we need to talk about represents something far less noble. Erikr. Erikr is not a Jarl. Let's get that out of the way immediately. He holds the title of Thane under Jarl Elisif, which technically makes him an advisor, not a ruler. But here's the thing. Erikr arguably wields more real influence over Solitude than some Jarls wield over their entire holds. And he does it without a throne, without a court, and without a single shred of legitimacy beyond his wallet. He openly admits he has a stake in almost anything important in Solitude. That's not a boast. That's a confession. His economic interests have burrowed so deep into the city's governance that the line between advisor and shadow ruler barely exists anymore. He sits in Elisif's court, nods along during meetings, and quietly controls the commercial arteries of Skyrim's capital city. But the moment that tells you everything you need to know about Erikr is the Dainty Slode quest. During the Thieves Guild questline, Erikr hires the guild to plant false evidence on a ship captain named Volf. Volf didn't commit any crime. Erikr simply lost a business dispute and decided the most efficient solution was to destroy a man's reputation using organized crime. He literally weaponized the Thieves Guild as a corporate enforcement arm, framing an innocent captain to win a commercial argument. That's not corruption in the abstract. That's a specific documented act of subverting Solitude's entire legal system for personal profit, all while sitting comfortably in the Blue Palace as a trusted member of the Jarl's inner circle. And the most revealing detail about Erikr is what happens if the Stormcloaks take Solitude. He doesn't flee. He doesn't resist. He relocates to the Blue Palace under new management and continues doing business, because his power was never tied to Elisif or the Empire or any political faction. It was always economic. He adapts to whoever sits on the throne because the throne was never where his power came from. Erikr's inclusion in a video about Jarls might seem strange, but that's exactly the point. He exposes the gap between Skyrim's formal hierarchy of titles and thrones and the informal hierarchy of wealth and criminal leverage that actually determines who controls what. The title says Thane. The reality says something closer to Kingmaker, but if you think Erikr's brand of shadow governance is bad, wait until you meet the woman who perfected it, and she actually got the title to match. Jarl Maven Blackbriar. Maven Blackbriar doesn't become powerful when she becomes Jarl. She's powerful long before anyone hands her a title. The matriarch of the Blackbriar family runs Riften's entire economy through the Blackbriar Meadery, a mead monopoly that generates enough wealth to buy loyalty from every corner of the hold. But the mead is just the foundation. What she built on top of it is something no other character in Skyrim can claim. According to Mjol the Lioness, Maven maintains active ties to both the Dark Brotherhood and the Thieves Guild simultaneously. Think about that for a second. She has access to professional assassins and professional thieves as personal instruments of political control. Nobody else in the entire game commands both. Not Ulfric, not the Emperor, nobody. That combination makes her functionally the most dangerous person in Skyrim, and she knows it, and she doesn't even try to hide it. Maven openly tells you she has Jarl Layla Lawgiver and the Riften Guard in her pocket. She's not whispering this in back alleys. She's saying it to your face, daring you to do something about it. This is a woman who treats shadow governance as a public fact because she's confident nobody can challenge her. But here's where her ruthlessness really shows. Her own son, Sibby Blackbriar, sits rotting in prison, and she does absolutely nothing to free him. She could. She has the resources, the connections, the leverage. Or she simply chooses not to, because sacrificing family loyalty is a price she'll pay without hesitation if it serves her political position. If the Imperial Legion wins Riften during the Civil War, Maven gets formally appointed Jarl, and the first thing she does is install Hemming Blackbriar as steward and Maul as her housecarl. Every single layer of official governance, from the Jarl's seat to the administrative staff to the personal bodyguard, becomes a Blackbriar operation. It's a complete family takeover with zero pretense of independence. Now here's the part that drives the community absolutely insane. Maven cannot be killed. She's flagged as an essential character, meaning no matter how much she antagonizes you, no matter how many threats she makes, the game literally will not let you remove her. And players have spent years developing workarounds, destroying her economic assets, strengthening the Thieves Guild against her interests, eliminating her business contacts one by one, but she persists. And honestly, that essential status might be the most honest thing Skyrim says about how power actually works. Maven was governing Riften before she ever held the title of Jarl, and everyone in the city knew it. The formal appointment just made the paperwork match reality. She's not a villain who seized power through some dramatic coup. She's the person who was always in charge, and the system eventually stopped pretending otherwise. If you thought Maven's brand of politics was as cynical as Skyrim gets, wait until you meet a replacement Jarl who was literally handed a throne she never earned. Jarl Jarl Sorely the Builder. Sorely the Builder is what happens when a civil war doesn't just change flags, it changes the entire personality of a region. She's the Stormcloak replacement for Idgrod Ravencrone in Hjalmarch, and the contrast between these two couldn't be more extreme if Bethesda had designed it as a joke. You go from a mystical seer who speaks in cryptic visions and unsettling prophecies to a woman from Stonehills whose entire identity revolves around construction projects and physical labor. And honestly, there's something refreshing about that. Sorely comes from a working family. Her husband Pactor is the overseer of Rock Wallow Mine. Her son Surgar is part of the same household. Yeah, and her entire background is defined by resource management and hands-on craftsmanship. No political dynasty, no supernatural gifts, no ancient bloodline. Just a woman who knows how to build things and keep operations running. But here's where it gets interesting. Her leadership philosophy is the exact inverse of Idgrod's in almost every conceivable way. Where Idgrod governed through contemplation and vague spiritual insight, Sorely governs through tangible improvement, fortifications, settlement expansion, physical development you can actually see and touch. She assumes High Moon Hall in Morthal, going from craftsperson to administrator of an entire hold, which is a massive jump in scope that the game never really explores. And that's the honest truth about Sorely. Her characterization is thinner than almost any other Jarl in the game. Bethesda doesn't give her the same depth of dialogue, the same personal conflicts, or the same narrative weight that other Jarls receive. She exists more as a philosophical counterpoint than a fully realized character, but that thinness actually tells us something. Skyrim is a game that romanticizes mysticism. Seers, mages, Daedric artifacts, prophetic visions. The game loves that stuff. Therefore, a practical builder who just wants to improve infrastructure was never going to get the same narrative attention as a woman who claims to see the future. There's something quietly honest about that imbalance. The game undervalues Sorely the same way her world probably would. What she does prove, though, is that the Civil War isn't just swapping political allegiances. It's fundamentally altering what kind of person leads each region. Nash, a seer gets replaced by a builder. Mysticism gets replaced by pragmatism. The entire governing philosophy of Hjalmarch transforms based on which side wins. And if you think that kind of philosophical replacement is dramatic, wait until you see what happens when the Silverblood family gets their hands on Markarth. Jarl, Thongvor, Silverblood. Thongvor doesn't seize power in the Reach. He just stops pretending his family doesn't already have it. Before he ever sits in the Jarl's seat, the Silverbloods are already the dominant economic force in Markarth. They run the silver mines. They run Sidna Mine, which is literally a prison where inmates are forced to extract ore for the family's profit. They own property, employ half the city, and bankroll Stormcloak operations in the region. So when the Stormcloaks take the Reach and Thongvor replaces Igmund, it's not a transfer of power. It's paperwork, but here's where the contrast gets interesting. Igmund spent his entire tenure walking a tightrope. Empire on one side, Stormcloaks on the other, Thalmor breathing down his neck, Forsworn attacking from the hills. He wasn't a great Jarl, but he understood that Markarth survives through diplomacy, not aggression. Thongvor throws that playbook in the fire. His politics are confrontational across the board. He has a deep hatred for elves rooted in opposition to Thalmor influence, and an even deeper hatred for the Forsworn who threaten both Markarth's stability and his family's bottom line. Where Igmund balanced, Thongvor swings, and that would make the Reach significantly more volatile under his rule. But here's the part that should bother Stormcloak supporters the most. The entire rebellion is built on the idea of Nordic freedom. Freedom to worship Talos. Freedom from imperial control. Freedom from Thalmor oppression. Noble ideals. But Sidna Mine's exploitative prison labor system continues under Thongvor without a single reform. The Silverbloods keep profiting from forced labor the same way they always have. Nordic freedom, apparently, has limits. The community debate around Thongvor always circles back to the same question. Does he represent a genuine alternative vision for the Reach, or just a more aggressive version of the same exploitation? And the honest answer is that Markarth's power structure remains fundamentally intact regardless of which Jarl sits in the chair. The mines keep running, the prisoners keep digging, the family keeps profiting, and that's the pattern across all 14 Jarls we've covered. Formal titles change, factional allegiances shift, the Civil War reshapes who sits in the seat, but the underlying structures of wealth, criminal influence, and institutional power tend to persist no matter what. Skyrim changes its leaders far more easily than it changes itself. If you enjoyed this video and want to see who is the most evil Daedric prince, click the video on the screen now.